Good evening, class. Today we're going to look at JavaScript output sources. This lecture is going to take about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have some practice examples. I'll need you to follow along for the entire lecture and also work through the practice examples. So JavaScript has a number of ways to output files. You can output files through a page, writing to a page, others by overwriting the content of the page or logging the content or even outputting it to a printer. Now, these specifically that we're going to look at in this lecture are using the inner HTML, which you can not only write output, but you can also accept input. We can also look at the DOM object attribute or property called .value, and we'll also look at writing output to an HTML using document.write, as well as the alert box and also window.print. Now, additionally, we'll go ahead and look at console.log because in JavaScript it's very important to find a way to output what you have done in your code. So let's talk about the inner HTML property. The inner HTML property sets or returns the HTML content via the inner HTML property of that element. HTML content you would set, this concerns textual tags that contain HTML or other text. So here's some examples. For example, the body tag, the div tag, span, H1 as well through H7 and so on, the P tag, the anchor tag. These are the most common that you would actually use this for. You can also modify the content of tables. For example, anything inside the table tag, the TR row tag, the TD tag, T-body, TH, T-head, or T-foot. And this also applies to any textual element that contains HTML or text. However, the inner HTML will not work with your input elements or text area elements, things that you would typically use for form inside of forms. Okay, so using the inner HTML property, the syntax you're going to use for this is basically if you have for example, here we have a paragraph, we have an ID specified called myPara, and there's some text inside of it. And if we're running some type of script like a mouse event, a key up, etc., what we can do is we can use the document.getElement by ID, pass in quotes the name of your ID, so we have myPara wrapped in quotes, and then that, of course, is inside the parenthesis. And then we have the property .inner HTML. And you can see that we're doing a left assignment here, passing in new paragraph content. Now, when that runs, what it will produce is, again, the paragraph, and it'll replace all of the text inside of myPara with the new paragraph content. You can also grab the content, get the content from HTML. So for example, let's say before you have the text, paragraph, an ID, myPara, and inside of it, text that the reader sees, right? And we want to grab that text and do something with it. Well, again, we could do that through a mouse click, a key up event, whatever. We're going to get the value, get the text out of that, and how we would do that is we'd say, document get element by ID. In the parentheses, we'd pass in the quotes, myPara, and we use the property .inner HTML. And you'll notice here we're left assigning the value that's grabbed from that inner property, that inner HTML. We're assigning it to a new variable called myPar, and that will actually grab that content and assign it to the myPar variable. Now this can be read, you can process it, you can alter it, you can append to it, you can do a number of different things in JavaScript now that you have the content of that text. You could output it in an alert, another inner HTML element, console.log, or you can even submit it to the server. Now, we mentioned a moment ago that you cannot use inner HTML to access things like input area, text area, form elements. This is where the value property is used. The value property sets or returns values from the value attribute of a text field. This text field could be an input, a text area, or other form elements like buttons or radio buttons or whatnot. Now, the value property specifies the value of the input text field. This corresponds to the value attribute on various types. So it could be a button, a reset button, a submit. It specifies the text of the button. And so with the value attribute, with that value property, you can change those values. The value attribute also specifies the text, right? Whether the text contains text or password or hidden. And so using this value property, you can address value attributes. You can also address this for checkboxes, radio, or even the image. Now, to use the value property, this is a very simple way to set it. You would have input type, which is text, the name attribute, which here says the name is name, and the ID is my name, right? So we're going to run a script. This could be some mouse event, mouse click, key up, etc. And we would use the same method, document get element by ID, in parentheses, pass in quotes, my name, which is the ID for that input. And here we're saying dot value, and we're left assigning the text to the value. And so here we're saying Bob is your uncle. So if we had some type of event that happened on the page, we could fill that input, that HTML input form element with that text, Bob is your uncle. So after it's run, what you would literally see if you inspected the DOM of that page and looked at it, you would see input type, text, name is name in quotes, the ID is my name, right? And the value would show Bob is your uncle. That's how you would do that type of assignment. You can also get the property from this. So let's say before that you have the value that was entered was the name John. You can get that value using the same method as before, some type of event that occurs that's going to invoke this call. And notice first that we specify a variable called my name, and we're left assigning to variable the property contained at the document get element by ID, my name. And so it's grabbing the value of that object and assigning it. And again, we can use the my name variable. We can process it, append it, alter it, send it to a web server, output it to console, alert, enter text HTML, or some other logic, or whatever you want to do with it. Another output type that's used is the document.write. The document.write method, it writes HTML text like other HTML content, or it can be used to write JavaScript code to a document. We have to be careful with the document.write method. Usually this is used mostly for testing. Now keep in mind that if you call document.write method after the HTML of the document has been fully loaded, document.write will overwrite the entire page with new content. So typically the way we use the document.write is we stack it inside of script tags somewhere in the page that we want some type of calculation, or maybe we're going to retrieve data from a web server or so forth. Okay, so things you can do with it. You can write HTML content. You can write JavaScript function calls, and you can open up a new window by using, for example, here we're saying var x is the variable, window.open, and we're assigning that new window that was open, and then we're writing content to it. So you could open up a new window and write new content to that page. An alternative to document.write is document.writeLine. So think about it like this. Write will only append text one after the other on a page, whereas WriteLine will go to a new line and so forth and append the text. Document.write doesn't append at new lines, only WriteLine does that. So another important thing to consider about document.write and WriteLine is they support multiple expressions. This means that you can pass in at expression 1 in quotes a set of text, and then in expression 2, as long as it's comma separated, you could pass in a function, comma 3, so forth, and ad nauseum. You could keep appending to this. There's a number of multiple expressions that you could use on the document.write. Document.write using these multiple expressions is optional. You do not have to use these. If you don't want to use them, then you just don't put a comma and you don't include them. So keep in mind it is comma delimited. It's a comma delimited list of what to write to the output stream. This makes up multiple arguments that can be listed, and they'll be appended to the document in the order of occurrence. So 1, 2, 3, 4, so forth. All right, now we get to the window.alert. We've used the alert before last week, I believe, but the window.alert method, or alert for short, it displays an alert box with a specified message and an OK button. So a couple of notes about the window.alert. Typically, this is used if you want to make sure the information comes through to the user. What I mean by that is this alert box will take away the focus. So if they're typing, an alert message pops up, it takes away the focus of what they're doing, and it forces them to click on that before they can do anything else. So wherever they're at, it forces the user to read that message and to answer it. Now, it's not a good idea to overuse this method. In the past, we used it quite a bit for JavaScript debugging, but we're going to get into that in a little bit using the console.log as a debugging method. You really only need to use this when you need the user to respond to a message that they can't get away from. And that's really the purpose of it. All right, syntax is very basic. You can type window.alert, or you can just type alert for short. So alert some text. And all of these methods that we've used so far, you can also use in the console. And we'll demonstrate the console in a moment. Okay, related to the alert is the window.prompt or the window.confirm. The window.prompt method, or prompt for short, will generate a dialog box that's very similar to alert, except it's going to have an input box and a cancel and an OK. So you would use this if you need to gather some information that the user needs to answer. Maybe you have a security question. Maybe you have maybe you're just trying to gather information about the user. It's not used a lot, but you can use this. So the syntax for this is very basic. You'll notice you have two parameters for the prompt method. You have the text that will show up on the prompt, and you have a default value that you can pre-populate it with. So in this example, we have prompt with the parenthesis, quotes, please enter your name, close quote, comma, and then you have in quotes, George. And what that would do, it would cause a prompt to appear on the page, just like an alert. And just like the alert, it takes the focus away from whatever the user is doing. And they can hit cancel, or they can type in a variable. And whatever they type in is going to be assigned to, you can access that by using the var person. So you would use this option For example, here, the person variable that we have specified, you could take that and pass it into an inner HTML to give a little bit more responsiveness to your web page. So say someone types in their information, you could actually output it in the HTML and say, welcome George, or whoever that might be. Or you can send it to an alert. You could send it to another prompt, a window.write, or attach it to a value onto the page somewhere for an input. There's a number of things you could do there. The confirm method, this is very similar to the dialog, but what this does is it gives you, it asks a question. You're asking a question of the user, and they need to say okay or cancel to the question that you're asking. And the value that this produces is Boolean, okay? So I want you to consider the following code here. We have a var text, and we have the method confirm. We're assigning it to a variable called r, and inside the confirm is some text, okay? This could be a question, it could be whatever that you want to have answered. Now we're grabbing the value r, the variable r, and this will always, using confirm, be a Boolean response. So the easy way to do this is we'll say if, and we haven't got into using conditional logic yet, but this is the basics of conditional logic. If, and inside parentheses, you'd say r double equals. Okay, double equals is what you use for evaluating Boolean objects. So if r double equals true, we close the parenthesis, we have a curly bracket to point out the declaration block for this piece of logic, and we say that if this is true, then we're going to assign this text to the text variable. Otherwise, else, we're going to assign you press cancel to the value. Now this code right here is a simple way of evaluating what is on a confirm box and reading that Boolean value. Okay, so that's the confirm. Now let's look at one of the items that's very important for us to use, and that is the console.log. So this is used, again, primarily for testing purposes. Maybe you need to output something into the log. Maybe a user is doing something and you need to see it. But this is primarily used for your development. You wouldn't leave your browser filled with all of these console.log statements because it will eat up memory in the browser. All right, so a long time ago, everyone used to use the alert method for testing JavaScript, and believe me, it got ugly because every time the alert would pop up with a piece of data, it would take the focus away, and sometimes the alert message doesn't do a very good job of deciphering what objects are or object arrays, and so it only would display just object or obj in the alert, and that doesn't tell you what the content is. With console.log, it doesn't do this. Console.log gives you a very easy way to debug your code as you're writing it, and you can use it to evaluate. Now, the way you use the console is you have your browser window open, and you're going to press F12 on the keyboard, or if you're on a Mac, you'd use the function F12. And with the browser open, when you do that, that will bring up the console. And we're going to demonstrate all of this in a minute. We're going to walk through these different abilities. So you can output objects and text, and it's very useful for inspecting object arrays. All right, so using the console.log, very basic usage, okay? You can output the text like hello world, and it will output it in the console, that text. Or you can specify an object array like var object, and this is a JSON object, by the way. This is the syntax for that. This is a very basic object array. We have a key value pair here. This is the key, and this is the value. And so it would output this in the log, and it makes it easier to be seen. And of course, then you would take your object, pass it into the console, and it would display it. Now, there's a lot more to the console object besides log. And I want to mention these briefly. You can also output error messages. So if there is something going on your page that you need to capture a certain error, you can output that. And this becomes useful if you've written a website and it's out in production, people are using it, and something breaks. And they call you and they say, hey, the page is broken. Well, if you've used your console.error correctly, you can actually output specific error messages to the console, and you can walk them through the process of hitting F12 on the keyboard and reviewing what those error messages are. And there's a whole variety of types of input or output messages you can do here. You can have a warning. So if there's a particular condition that you want to trap that's not deadly to your application, but it's like a warning, you can do that here. You can output trace, which will put the complete stack trace of where particular code had failed within your JavaScript. It'll give you the line numbers and everything. This is very valuable use, by the way. Info is kind of similar to console.log. It just outputs an informational message that you want to put in there. Again, this one is used primarily for debugging, but it's available. And then you have other options. This is again for debugging. Say you have an array of tabular data, kind of like what we have up here. You can specify it, send it to a table, console.table, and it'll display it in the console in tabular format with rows and columns. It's kind of nice. And really, there are several other methods available to the console object as well. Okay, and now we get to the last one. This is the window.print. The window.print, or print method for short, this prints the contents of the current window. There is no JavaScript API that will actually let you send messages to the printer, but what the browsers do offer in print is it takes the content of the page, it presents it in a separate dialog box, and what this does is it allows the user then to select a print option. Now, this kind of goes back to the discussion we had several weeks ago about the CSS media type for print. If you remember, there are several different media types you can specify. So if one of your media types is set for printer and you have a particular way you want the content to be laid out for, a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper for print, this is where you'd want that to be. If someone ever uses the Command P or Control P on the keyboard for your browser, it will actually bring up this print. All right, so the syntax for this is very easy. Usually you would invoke this with a simple button. You'd say button, on click, print this page. And it'll take the page, all the contents of that page, and it'll throw it up into a dialog for print. Okay, so we're going to do some coding now. And what I want you to do is go ahead and open up your let's say your Atom browser, and open up a blank HTML page. And in your Atom browser, you'll notice that I'm continuing to use my sample site here, my website. I've got a folder down here called JavaScript samples. And let's see here, let me organize some things in the background real quick. We're going to go through these real quick, group by group. The first one that I want us to use, first one that we're going to use is looking at the inner HTML. So we're going to just put a script tag up here, close script tag, and we're going to create a function, and we're going to call this function change paragraph. Okay. Now, for our change paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to some ideas as we move through this of variables. So we're going to add a parameter to our change paragraph, and we're going to call this ID. And in here, we are going to say document get element by ID, and we're going to pass in the ID object, and we're going to say enter HTML and in quotes behind it, right? Now we're going to come down here and we're just going to enter a paragraph tag, and this text concerns the use of the inner HTML property. Okay, save that, go ahead and refresh. Everything is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and open for us the console. So you can do that with function F12 or F12. You can also do this by going inspect, and that will also open it. This brings up the console down below, and if kind of squish that over a little bit. If there was an error at this point in our JavaScript, it would actually display it here. So using our console, this is a good way to address this. We can actually call our method up here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the ID, because we have to specify an ID for our sample here for it to work. I'm going to call it my para. We'll save it. And you'll notice that in our code right now, it just has a left assignment with empty quotes, right? So let's call this from the console. We'll say change paragraph, and you can see it automatically with the console. It already knows this because it's refreshed it and it sees it, right? I'm going to pass in quotes, my para, close the quotes, close the parenthesis, put a semicolon at the end, and hit enter. And when I hit enter, the text should disappear. And we got a problem. Cannot set property of null. Okay, so for some reason this is a null value because it doesn't recognize my para. So let's do this for right now. This may have been because I didn't save and refresh. It probably was. All right, so now I've identified it. So let's go ahead and, well, it doesn't matter. Let's just do this again. Change paragraph, put in quotes, my dash para, close quotes, enter, and you notice the text went away. Now to prove my point, we'll go ahead and put the ID back on this. We'll refresh it again. There it is. I'm going to call my, let's see, change paragraph, and we're going to pass in my para and hit enter, and it disappears. So what we've done is we've done the assignment of this. But let's say that we want to take this a step further. Let's go ahead and do what we talked about earlier and say, do an assignment property. So I'm creating a variable called my paragraph, my para, and I'm going to do this document.getElement. Oops. Let's copy that, paste that in right there, put a semicolon at the end. We're capturing the value of my para, and we're going to now put it here at this spot. Whoops. I'm going to say my par plus some text. So the idea is that we want to append onto this text, right? So we're going to say more text space minus, and I'm going to put space minus here as well. All right, so if we think about this, we'll refresh our code so we get the code base back again so we could see it. Think about what's going to happen here. I just realized that you all cannot see me typing into this window. Let me drag my view over a little bit here. So here's the console, okay? Here's the console I was talking about. And I've been typing into this console. I apologize, guys. I'm not going to go back and re-record this, but here's the console. So I'm typing in the paragraph, change paragraph method, because once you refresh, the Chrome browser recognizes the method. I'm now passing in quotes the name of the ID, my para, and you can see that it's referenced right here on this ID, my para, right? So we have this text. We have this over here. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and you'll notice that as I do this, it should append more text. There it is. Now I can copy this. Actually, I think I can do the upward keyboard. Yep, I can. And do it again, right? And it's just appending more text, more text, more text. This is using the document.get element ID. That's using the console. The other way we can do this is we can actually attach the call of this this particular button to an on-click. And kind of a silly way to do that would be to actually say on-click change paragraph. And notice I'm in a double quotes. So what you can do to get around this is use single quotes. My para. We'll save it, come down here to the end, and put a semicolon before that last double quote. Okay? Save it, come over here, we'll refresh. And now every time I click, oh, what's going on? Oh, that's what's going on. On lick. I know you guys are laughing at me. All right, here we go. Refresh it. Now we'll click on it, and you can see it's just adding more text, right, on every click. You could put the on-click event. You can make it a mouse over. Let's see. Is it on hover? Yeah, there it is, on mouse over. Ah! Mouse over. Take out those extra pieces there. All right, so now on mouse over, it's going to do that. So I'll refresh it, and you can see as I mouse over the event, it's just flooding this, right? And anywhere it's on the text, the mouse over is capturing that because I'm telling it to mouse over the paragraph, this paragraph. And this paragraph keeps growing, so I can just barely touch it. I don't have to come all the way up here to do it. It'll just do it automatically. Okay, so that is the on-click method. So let's go ahead and look, that is the inner HTML method. So there's some other output options here, and that is the value. So I'm going to take this out right here. I'm going to type a, let's see, I'm going to use another paragraph. And inside my paragraph, I'm going to have a input, type text. The name is important if it's in a form for submits. So just for general purposes, I'm just going to say F name for first name. I'm going to assign this an ID though, because I want a handle on this. And I'm going to say my-f name. Notice that the value is blank right now. We'll come up here to, let's refresh that to get rid of that so far. So here's our input. And we're going to change this because we want to get the value of that object, right? And we're going to change the my par because that's not really useful to us. We're going to call that something more useful like f name. Oops, f name. Okay, so now we have that piece done. I'm going to take out this rest of that code. And we have the value there, right? So let's change name of our method to change name. And we're going to give it two parameters. We're going to give it an ID and a text parameter. And over here, I'm going to say equals text. So think about what we're doing. With this piece of code right here, we're getting the ID of the element on the page, which is this element here. We're accessing the property value and we're passing in text to be entered into it, right? Okay, so what is something we could do? Well, if we save this, we'll refresh it. We'll come down here and we'll just call change name. And what is our ID? Our ID is my f name, quotes, comma, and I'm going to put in quotes again because this is text. Okay, from the console you have to use text, and you would have to do this anyways in JavaScript. Use quotes for text. So I'm going to put in George. Hit in, do it like that. Hit enter, and you notice it has assigned George. Okay, so this is an easy way to do that, and of course we could do this through any number of methodologies. We could do it on a mouse click, we do it on an event, whatever, right? But what about when we want to read the value that's in here? Let's say that I type in a name and I hit enter and I want to do something with that name, all right? Well, let's change it up a little bit. I'm going to take the text out, take that out. I've got my var name right here. So let's join two ideas here. Let's have another paragraph, and this one is going to be called output, right? Output f name, and we want to output the name into that paragraph. So we're joining two ideas here together. So let's think about this. Document get element by ID. We know the name of the ID already, so I'm not going to use a variable here, but I'm going to say output f name, and it's going to be inner HTML, and we're going to pass in to assign to this the value from the variable up there for f name. Okay, so we have those done, but I want this to be on I want it to happen on an event like lost focus. So on lost focus is actually blur, right? On blur. And we're going to tell it to change name, single quotes. The name that we're accessing here is this variable. Variable is my name, so my dash name. We have that. All right, so let's look at the code real quick, what we got here. And for our purposes, I'm going to bring this down one extra line. Whoops. So we can see it. So we have input type text, variable, the name attribute is name, the ID is my fname, and the value is empty. On blur, we're going to change my name. And what are we going to change it to? Well, we're going to change it to something over here. All right, so I'm going to refresh, come in here, and I'm going to type Bob is your uncle, hit enter, tab off of it. Oh, we got an error. Well, let's look at our error. By the way, this is a stack trace, so it cannot read the value of null. Why is that? So the ID that's why. Because the value here is not the same as there. This is the value of the ID, and I'm telling it pass in my name instead of fname. It comes up here and it can't find it. So yeah, it is null. All right, so we'll refresh it again. I'm going to copy this text. Refresh it again, paste that in there, and I click out, lose focus, and what's it do? Right? It's adding it, right? So these are two ways. We've done the inner HTML, we've done the value property. You can also do this with other like text area and so forth. But let's go ahead and consider some of the other ways that we can write text to. For example, what about document.write? All right, so for document.write, let's take out our input here. I'm going to take out this function, and I'm going to type in, hi, I am some text that will disappear if I call a document.write method after loading. Okay, we'll refresh this real quick. There's some text, right? We have an output text below. We don't really need that one. Take that one out. Okay, but now I'm going to just put a simple simple button click. Okay, so we'll say button, and if we save that and refresh, there's the button, right? There's nothing there. We'll put some text in here. Click me, please. Refresh that. There's the button. Nothing's happening with it. Let's write our function. So we got function, and this is example write, and document.write. Let's think about this. Test after the click. Okay. So we got everything set. We don't have the method attached to this yet, so let's go ahead and we'll attach the method. We'll say on click example write. And let's refresh it. And keep in mind what happens. We've loaded the page. We're going to call document.write, and what it'll do is it'll wipe out everything. See? So document.write will rewrite the page. If we refresh, we get our original page. It goes away, right? That's what document.write does. Now, we could also pass in additional arguments. We could say, another test. Okay, refresh it. There it is, another test. If we wanted it to appear, say, inside of its own paragraph, we could just do it like this. Put the paragraph tags in. Refresh it, click on it. Now it's down there because we've told it to write HTML. And of course, you could pass in other things. You could do other operations, right? You could say alert. Ha ha, you clicked it. So now we've embedded a function call in there. So we refresh, haha, you clicked it, and it's all gone, right? Those are some of the things that you can do with the document.write. Now we've already talked about the other option, of course, is the write line. I'm not going to demonstrate how to do that. The next option is the alert, and I just demonstrated the alert, so I'm not going to go into that one. You guys know how to use the alert. But let's go ahead and look at the sister components to this, the window prompt, right? So we have, let's do this. Let's take out all of that, and we're going to use the window prompt, okay? So with the window prompt, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Let's send a prompt, just like in our lecture. Say var person prompt. By the way, you notice that I'm not typing in window dot, right? You could if you wanted to, but all the browsers pretty much understand this. So the first part of this is the text, so please enter your name. And the last part is a default value. So we could leave it blank or we populate it. I'm going to leave it blank for right now. And then I'm going to give this, I want to do something with this, right? I want it to change. Well, it'd be kind of fun to change the button name, I think. Let's see, ID. Let's not do the button. Let's do something different. I do not know what's going on here. There we go. Let's do H1. And we're going to say welcome. And inside of our H1, we're going to do a span. And we'll call this welcome name. And we'll do a closing span. And just to kind of give you an idea what's going to happen when you refresh it, you have this here, right? So we want this message to appear on load. So we're going to come down here in our script, and we're going to say window dot load. I think that's it, right? Well, let's not do that. Let's put it on hover over. So on mouse over, we're going to call example write. And then we've got the person text so far. So we're going to document.get element by ID, quotes, welcome name, inner HTML equals person, right? We're going to take the person value that we get from up here and assign it and rewrite that. All right, so let's refresh. I hover over, there it is. Welcome Michael. I click OK, and there we go. It has updated the page. So that's using the window prompt. And of course, if I keep doing that, it's gonna, yeah, it's annoying. The other one is the confirm, and I'm not going to demonstrate that one. That's basically you confirming that they've, with a confirmed dialog. And now we get to console.log. Okay, so let's keep a lot of this the same, except we're going to append the contents of our name to the log. So we're going to say console.log, let's see, person. Save it, refresh, hover, that's the person's name, and then down there you can see there's the name, right? We could add a little bit more informational text. We could do something like this. Now we're appending, concatenating text using the plus symbol. Person's name. All of this is in text, so it'll kind of appear as a label, and then there's person, so refresh it. Mike, click OK, and now you can see we've written to the log. All right, so that's the console.log. You can also use the error. So we can say this is an error. Adam's trying to be too helpful. All right, so let me clean up a little bit this that it did. So refresh it, hover, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And it makes it in red, right? Because it's an error message. And it gives you a little bit of information, the call stack of where this occurred at. You can say console dot warning. Refresh it, hover, blah, 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 blah. Again, it's in red. It says this is a warning, right? It tells you the call stack, where it occurred, and so forth. And you can click all that. If you do trace is supposed to be more detailed. So we'll refresh it, hover, blah, 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 click OK. And the trace gives you more detailed information, okay? And you can append a lot more information in there. Or you can just say info. Info is really kind of like log, though. So hover, blah, 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 and there's info, right? It's kind of like the log. Although log does not give you this extra information. I guess that's really the difference. If we go back to that and test it again, yeah, it does. They are pretty much identical. And then the other one you have is table. So let's say that you have some data that is more trying to think how to term this. It's more tabular, right? So let's see, JSON tabular data. Let me find some examples here, and we'll throw that in there so you can see it. You all bear with me, I'm just searching for some samples here. So let's take, this is a pretty big set of data. Okay, so what we're going to do, I don't know if this will work or not, but we're just going to throw it in and see. I've got some data here, so I'm going to beautify this a little bit. This is the data. I've got it getting ready to be called by a table. And I really don't want a prompt up here. I just want it to call it. So take out the prompt. I'm going to refresh it, and if I hover, there is the tabular data that you can see down there. It's actually produced it in a more tabular fashion. And that's actually pretty cool. So if you think about it, you could produce all types of data that way. All right, so that is the console. And really, we're kind of getting down to the last option here, and that is the print. So we'll take out this piece of code, take out that semicolon for a second, and we'll use the print. So really, this is just, you could say window.print or print in general. And that is basically going to try to attempt to print everything on the screen. So we'll refresh it. I hover. It's brought up a print window. And you could do whatever you want. Now, again, if you're going to do this, I recommend that you have a separate media, CSS media type for print, and install your media appropriately, separate from your other HTML. Guys, that's it. I hope that's helped you, and I will see you on Thursday.